so that we can talk about truly historic situation as it relates to the weather. Record levels of flooding along rivers and creeks.
Well, you know, on the anniversary of Hurricane Matthew, I think it's important for us to look back and see what we did right, what we did wrong, and how we can prepare the next time. The one thing I want our citizens to know is you can never be over-prepared.
October 8th, 2016 was one of the few occasions that I've really been intimidated by weather. And that challenge came at 3:30 in the morning when my staff called me and told me that the barn was flooding and that the shelter was in danger of flooding. I've never felt so helpless in my life.
I think when it really hit me deep is when the representatives from FEMA came down. He said, this isn't a 100-year flood, this isn't even a 500-year flood. We're talking biblical proportions. And I think that's when it really hit me, what kind of tragedy we could be looking at.
In terms of disasters I've experienced in my lifetime, probably the worst was Hurricane Floyd. And at that time I was working in a coastal community, and we were cut off from the north to south and the west for about 3 days due to flood waters. So Hurricane Matthew reminded me a lot of that situation.
Many citizens, long-term native individuals of Cumberland County, never have seen this type of impact in their entire lifetime.
There was so much loss in this storm. There was some people lost their homes, some people lost their jobs, some people lost pets, but some people lost their lives. And we have to be cognizant of our responsibilities of this. We sat in the EOC many times hoping that there was no lives lost, and it brings a shudder down to all of us when you hear that story and it comes through.
Hurricane Matthew was very catastrophic. We saw numbers in calls and rain that we've never seen before. For like rainfall, 15 to 18 inches over parts of Cumberland County. There were over 1,300 rescues from swiftwater teams. We received over 8,300 911 calls just in the Cumberland County 911 Center. At one point we had over 506 people in our shelters, with over 1,400 different people registered 2 weeks of the event. Many areas were flooded that have never seen flooding before, along Rockfish Creek, Little Rockfish Creek, Manchester, as well as some of the tributaries leading from western Cumberland County down to the Cape Fear River. There was over 1,100 homes damaged throughout Cumberland County and the city of Fayetteville, as well as over 150 businesses that were damaged during that time.
Infrastructure was impacted, not only transportation, but our power systems, the power grid, our radio communication systems, our telephone systems. From the water standpoint even, all of those major impacts, our railroad system was impacted. So in that impact, we were resilient. That is the most powerful thing about not only all of our first responders. There were stories, and there'll be stories told for many years to come, about how we used a tractor to go retrieve someone, how we used a boat, a canoe, or anything that would float or that would move to go rescue themselves. Neighbor helping neighbor, checking on neighbors, people that didn't know each other, coming together in response to a catastrophic event.
Another thing that struck me about this more than anything else, when I was in the EOC, I saw first responders and staff members from the health department and social services. They were there and they didn't have lights in their own house. Their families may not have had lights, and they're struggling themselves, but they knew that their responsibilities were there to take care of the people who needed them, and that was their job. That story was told time and time again as we went through this EOC.
During the response phase, the blessings that we had with the federal teams being local, that we were not aware of at the time, when rescue and swiftwater rescue teams were becoming overwhelmed with rescues. Like we said, we had over 1,300 rescues conducted during that time frame. When we reached out to the state for additional assistance, we found that there were federal teams teams from New York, New Jersey, Ohio, and Pennsylvania sitting right close by staging. They were staging if Matthew were to have affected Florida more so than it did. We were very lucky to have them, and they supported us in ways that we could never repay.
We had a boarding facility in the downtown area that gave us a call and said that their facility was being flooded, that the animals were in danger, the people were in danger, and that they needed assistance. They needed somewhere to place these animals. By the time we got there, we couldn't even drive up to the facility because of the amount of flooding and how high the waters were at that place. So people were halfway meeting us, pulling animals, carrying them to the trucks. We were, getting the animals as well, loaded as many as we could. I think all in all, we had about 25 to 30 dogs that we ended up picking up from the facility and bringing them back here to the shelter, animal control.
I said a number of times when it was impending that this was going to happen, that Matthew was going to come into Cumberland County, I said nobody blames us for the storm and everybody appreciates the rescue, but the recovery is where we're going to be judged.
So during Hurricane Matthew, we operated the shelters in terms of helping to assist Red Cross with the shelter. But in addition to that, Department of Social Services, one of our #1 responsibilities is providing services to citizens who need food assistance, medical assistance, those kinds of things. So the first thing that we did is we looked at our existing citizens who had lost their food stamp benefits and the food that they had bought with those benefits. And so even though the county office building was closed, we brought the Department of Social Services staff in early, and we started immediately under policy. We could replace those citizens who, because of power outages, because they had lost their homes, we could replace their benefits. And so we came in and we served almost 6,000 citizens, and we actually were able to replace their benefits.
In terms of what we've accomplished in recovery and resilience, working with our partners at FEMA and the state of North Carolina, and of course our local municipalities, we've been able to roll out a number of different programs. A number of these have been done through community development agencies. So those are really the go-to people when it comes to trying to figure out how to best meet the needs of individuals, because everybody's needs are unique. Some people may have had flood insurance, some people may have been renters, some of them may have been homeowners. So everybody's different in terms of their needs, and it's worthwhile for them to make an appointment with our community development department to be able to sit down and have an interview and just decide with them what may or may not be possible in terms of different disaster recovery grants and assistance.
And one of the responsibilities under the county emergency plan is for us to work with the different county agencies and community agencies to make sure that during the response efforts, that before Red Cross, before other agencies can get involved, that we have means for our citizens to access services immediately after the event. Different churches, different organizations came together, and we started identifying what were food needs, and we were able, through Second Harvest Food Bank, to set up food pantries all over the county so that people would have access to food. We had Salvation Army that was working with us on clothing donations and furniture donations, because a lot of people lost everything. They lost all their clothes, so immediately after the event, they needed clothes, so we worked with them and did various other organizations that assisted. And so that's the first piece of the unmet needs, is how do you immediately respond after the event to meet those immediate needs. Now, through the Cumberland Recovery Disaster Coalition, where now volunteers assume that role. And so they've continued the work of the Unmet Needs Committee, and now they've expanded it to your faith communities and different agencies, and they come together to say, what are the needs after everybody's gone?
Well, what stands out to me most at this point in time would be exactly where we're standing, over Cross Creek, directly behind our headquarters library in the background. This right here was completely inundated with floodwaters during Hurricane Matthew. Some of the other areas, obviously, that were very highly impacted for our community was the area around Rockfish Creek. And we have several facilities along Rockfish Creek that were, again, severely impacted from the floodwaters from Hurricane Matthew. One of the ones that comes to mind is the McCauley container site, which is located off Research Drive. And obviously after a storm event, you lose power, people have got to get rid of their debris. Food in the refrigerator, stuff that got flooded, or whatever impacts they may have, they need a site to get that material to. And obviously, I commend our solid waste staff. Donnie Tew and his staff done a tremendous amount of work. We were impacted, and we had that site completely opened back up that same week. Animal control was another area. We had next to our sheriff's training center, we had a bomb bunker that was completely inundated, so we have to replace that. We're in the process of doing that now. And then our animal control facility, we had the horse barn that also was impacted by floodwaters, some significant erosion going on there, and we've got that underway and completed.
Early in this conversation, I spoke about the representative of FEMA coming and saying that this wasn't a 100-year flood or a 500-year flood, but a biblical proportion. But as soon as he said that, I realized that in a month we may get another one. And even this year, 12 months later, we were right in the path of another destructive storm that could have come. I think we had a lot of lessons learned, and one of the lessons that we had learned was be prepared all the way up to the day that it could happen to you.
Preparedness. That is, when you are prepared, generally you have a very successful outcome. Maintaining safety, maintaining situational awareness, being aware of, researching where you live, making sure you understand the pathways to safety if you need to evacuate your residents. But also don't forget that emergency preparedness kit, that 72-hour time frame where you need to make sure that you have proper water, provisions, hygiene, and all those areas, medicine, documents, important legal papers. Make sure that you have that weather radio. And also don't forget our mass communication or awareness, Cumberland alerts. That is paramount.
I think in every disaster, there's always something, a light at the end. And I tell people that when a hurricane comes, you have all the wind and the rain, and as soon as it leaves, it's usually one of the most beautiful days you've ever seen in terms of the sun being out. And I think what we want citizens to know is, first of all, preparation. You can never prepare enough. And that's one of the roles of the CDRC, is also to promote and educate around preparation. And you just can't prepare enough. I certainly hope that our citizens will register with Cumberland Alerts. That is so very important. Find your insurance papers. Take the time to learn what's covered. What is your disaster plan? What is your evacuation plan? Because it saves lives. And in Cumberland County, disasters are a reality.
I am proud of the men and women of Cumberland County, of what they did during that hurricane. But more important, what they're doing now after this hurricane. The hurricane, we weathered that storm. The next storm is the recovery. And that one is a lot longer, and it's a lot more difficult. I learned that. I thought the storm was going to be the most difficult part, surviving that. But the recovery, the people who were impacted, the people who were lost, that lost everything. And when they talk to you and you see it in their eyes and you feel it in their heart, and you can't help but feel for them, one of the things I tell the citizens here, to know that we're going to be with them to the very end. We're going to see this recovery through. And that's why it's important to look back. To look back at Hurricane Matthew, to say, let's learn things, let's be prepared, and let's get ready for the future.